Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Father Son Packers podcast, your brand new source for Packers content, analysis, and news. I am here today. My name is Tommy, and I'm here as always with my co-host, my dad, Matt. Dad, how you doing?
I'm doing well. It's been a good day.
Yep. We are recording to you now on Tuesday night, and we are here today to react to the Packers' new 53-man roster. It was official today. Cutdowns for today. It's a very tough day in the NFL, as a lot of people lose their shots. But we are here today to react to the team that the Packers have put forward that, fingers crossed, is going to win that 2023 Super Bowl.
Oh, it's likely, right? Of course.
Guaranteed to win us this 2023 Super Bowl. My mistake. We all make mistakes every now and then. But anyway, before we get started, we just wanted to let you guys know what is going on with us. We still have our new Twitter account out. We would love for you guys to give us a follow at FatherSonPacker. And we also have a new schedule to you coming for this regular season coming up. We are going to be regularly recording on Sunday and Thursday nights going forward as the season begins, because we want to just bring you as much Packers content as possible. We're going to be recording after game days on Sunday, so if we have a Monday night game, we will be recording Monday night, and then Thursday nights will be our pregame for the coming week. So just get ready for that. Get excited. We know we're really excited, and we're just excited to talk Packers with you, talk Packers. It's going to be a great season. We can't wait.
Looking forward to a lot of fun. Watch a lot of football.
Yeah. There's nothing like watching football on a nice autumn Sunday. There's just nothing like it. But anyway, Dad, without further ado, let's get down to the 53-man roster. And I know you had a little bit of analysis you had done that you kind of wanted to touch on before we got into the players the Packers picked.
Yeah, so I did a little homework the last few days because I had this notion, and maybe other people had put it out there, about are there certain positions where it's safer to cut a player and your possibility of getting them back is higher? And so I just kind of thinking, well, what if they, say keep a bunch of extra players one position and then say cut like a running back or, something else. It's like, is there any reason to think that's actually a thing? So I went through the last 6 years of the 53 cut downs for every team in the NFL. See how many players were cut at every position, and then how many players were claimed off of waivers the next day. So only the waiver claim. It's not the other kind of signings that happened later. And what I found was a little surprising to me in some ways, actually, though. I should say first that on average, there was about one player per team claimed off of waivers from the cut down. So it's actually not that high. Except for 2020, which is a really weird year where there's only like one player claimed for every two teams. And as you recall, that was the year with no preseason games, training camps weren't open to the public, and so teams didn't know as much about
totally makes sense.
Players.
Way less
and
information on these other teams.
Packers totally took advantage of that to hide Chris Barnes that year.
Yep.
So that was the year where people were.
They took a starter and snuck him onto the practice squad. He was the week one snap one starter, and they snuck him onto the practice squad. I remember looking out there and being like, "Who on earth is number 51?"
Yeah, and so that was kind of a league-wide phenomenon where hardly anybody got claimed, and certainly nobody who was an unknown like Barnes. I guess. I suppose I could look through all 16, but it was like only 16 players that year. In other years, it was more like 30-some. And so that year, is only 3% of the players who were waived got claimed. But in an average year, it's more like 7 or 8% of the players who are waived at the cut down to 53 get claimed. So I was wondering, are there any outliers? So one thing that surprised me is like the specialists, kickers, punters, and long snappers. I think it's probably a result of small sample size, but those are like the most common players to get picked up by other teams.
Yeah.
And they're
it's wild to me that there are less than 32 people in the world that can long snap. It's just a crazy thing to me. It does not seem like something and not to disparage the position at all, but it does not seem like something that there are only like 27 people in the world who can do.
Yeah. So in those three positions, it's only like two or three players claimed over the last 6 years at cutdowns, because there's not very many that get cut. Hardly any teams carry an extra one.
Well, usually once you have one, it's like they're on the roster for another 15 years, which hopefully Jack Coco. Hopefully Jack Coco.
Hopefully Jack Coco. I thought he was looking pretty solid. But so that was one thing. And then so the players that get picked, the positions that have the most players picked are wide receiver, cornerback actually is number one, then wide receiver, and then edge rusher.
And this is in terms of raw numbers,
That was just raw numbers. So 32 cornerbacks, 27 wide receivers, and 23 edge rushers.
Okay. And this was since what year again?
This is starting with 2016.
Okay, cool.
But the thing that's kind of interesting is like there's just a lot more wide receivers who get cut.
Yeah.
There's like way more
Makes
than any
sense.
other group. And the same with cornerback and edge. Those are like numbers 2 and 3 in terms of total number of players who get cut at the cutdowns. In terms of the percentage of those cut players who get picked, wide receivers are actually kind of in the middle, right around the same position as like running backs, which I was thinking, you can stash a running back and you're very likely to get him back. Well, the likelihood of any one running back getting claimed is just as high as any one cut wide receiver. The positions that were picked up the least were centers, defensive tackles, inside linebackers, and offensive tackles, actually, which kind of surprised me.
That surprises me, because you'd think, like, everyone always says, I know even, was it Pelissero tweeted today, Tom Pelissero of NFL Network, tweeted that he heard a lot of teams asking around about tackles, and asking around and looking at
Steelers
the tackles that have been cut. Yep, they traded with the Vikings a conditional 7th round for Jesse Davis, is his name? Is that right?
Who they got from the Vikings, but I did see that.
Ask my
but
producer.
And maybe it's just because that any tackle who has even the slightest chance of being good doesn't get let go.
Yeah, it was Jesse Davis, by the way.
Okay, it was Jesse Davis. So, like, cornerback, it's like 1 out of every 9 or 10 cornerbacks gets picked up. But for offensive tackles, it's only 1 out of every 25 who gets cut gets picked up. Same for like centers and inside linebackers. It's much more rare for them to get claimed. They're not, and the number who are cut is not that much different. So that surprised me a little bit. So some things were surprises to me. That cornerbacks are the least likely to get through of all the positions, and quarterbacks as well get picked up. But that's again a relatively small sample size, not terribly small. But it's mostly a tight grouping. It's only when you go to the top and the bottom that you really see a difference. Like all things like edge, running back, wide receiver, safety, guard, they're all around 6% of the cut players get picked up. So there's that much separating most of the positions. Mm-hmm. So that surprised me a little bit.
And that's definitely something to keep in mind, because I think Gutekunst had talked about it. A few GMs have talked about it, where with these new practice squad rules, you don't really have a 53-man roster anymore. You have a 69-man roster. You have each player from the practice squad can be promoted 3 different times throughout the season. That's right? It's 3 times.
Yes, and that's something I think we'll talk about later.
Exactly.
Some of the implications of that rule in particular.
And so you only want to send down the people to the practice squad that you don't think are going to get cut. And so I think that we should really view it through that lens, or that you don't think are going to get picked up, excuse me. So you should really view this roster through that lens of a lot of these guys are they're going to try and get back on the practice squad, the guys that were cut.
Yes.
And I think that they cut these guys thinking, hey, these are the ones that have the lowest likelihood of being claimed. And we can discuss whether or not we agree with them on that, but I think that that's the approach that they were taking.
Yeah, and the other thing to remember is, like, on average, a team only lose 1 player per year.
Yeah.
So it's a very small number that you actually are going to lose on average.
Exactly. But without further ado,
the Packers have only lost 3 in the last 6 years, and they've only claimed 2. So they've been on the lower end.
They're on the lower end, yeah.
Compared to other teams, they've lost fewer and claimed fewer than most teams.
Well, without further ado, let's get into talking about the roster. You ready to go?
Yep, ready to go. Yeah.
Okay, there are a few of
away.
these positions that I think we can breeze through because they're exactly as expected, and we are going to just barely touch on them. One of those positions is quarterback, where they are keeping Aaron Rodgers and Jordan Love. They cut Danny Etling, although I would not be surprised to see him back on the practice squad, and in fact, I think it's almost a certainty that you'll see him back on the practice squad. But do you have any notes on this, or should we just move right on?
Yeah, 2 is the only reason they didn't. The only year they didn't take 2 was Love's rookie year, where he couldn't have a training camp to become number 2.
Exactly.
So 2 seems to be the go-to for LaFleur.
Yeah, and as much as we loved having the Tim Boyle laser show, and as much as Danny Etling actually looked pretty solid in preseason, it's just not necessary to have 3 with call-ups. Yep. So on to running back, where I actually think this is the most interesting position of the 53. They only kept 2. They kept Aaron Jones and A.J. Dillon and no one else on the 53. And this is the least number kept under Matt LaFleur, where in the past 3 years they have kept 4, 4, 3, and then this year 2. And then when you look at other teams around the league, this 2 running back keeper is actually even more interesting because you look at all the other teams in the league, all 31 other teams, 24 of them kept 4 running backs, 7 of them kept 3 running backs, and the Packers were the only one to keep 2. So when you think about it, it almost does seem like either Kylan Hill's going to be back soon, or like immediately after the 4-week pup. They're comfortable losing one of Patrick Taylor or Goodson. Or third option, which we've talked about extensively before this podcast and we're going to talk about here now, is Amari Rodgers the de facto third running back?
Yes, and I heard several people the last couple of days talk about the Packers' third running back only gets about like 10% of the snaps, something like that in the season.
Yep, it's not much.
It's not that much. And the other thing we're talking about in terms of like getting, I've been thinking about this a little bit too. When I was making my own 53, I had it down to 2 actually running backs. And one of the things I was thinking is with Dexter Williams, Patrick Taylor, and Goodson all getting let go, even if one of those is picked up by another team, they could still, if they could get any two of those 3 in the practice squad, then they could, use call-ups that would cover 6 weeks for a third running back. And then, if somebody gets hurt or something happens, then you just sign one of them for the whole rest of the year.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, going back to I would like to talk about the Amari Rodgers running back.
Yeah, there's more
coming
there.
Because I think there's a lot there. So, according to Nate Tice on Twitter, Amari Rodgers had 4 rushes this preseason, and he only had 1 all of last season. And according to Peter Bukowski on Twitter, 9 of his 29 snaps versus the Chiefs were in the backfield. There is certainly something there where they are interested in getting him the ball in space, getting him the ball moving, getting him the ball out of the backfield. And maybe, he's not exactly a running back, but maybe he's that de facto third running back to spell Aaron Jones and A.J. Dillon and give them some more 2-back sets where they don't need to have Aaron Jones and A.J. Dillon on the field. They can do 2-back sets with Aaron Jones and Amari Rodgers, or A.J. Dillon and Amari Rodgers, so they don't always necessarily have to be using Jones and Dillon and using up those snap counts for them throughout the game.
Yeah, I think it's kind of, he'll be, based on some of the usage in the summer, more of the hybrid kind of player, similar to what Tyler Ervin was, where he was officially listed as a running back, but basically did both running back and wide receiver things, especially with regard to the jet motion, pre-snap motion that Amari Rodgers has been doing a lot of this year. And I thought he showed nice burst and wiggle, hitting the hole and avoiding tacklers.
He had a really nice
backfield,
a really nice 11-yard run versus the Chiefs, and
yeah,
at that point in the game, it was the best run by any running back, and it was just like, is Amari Rodgers the third best running back on this team? Now, Tyler Goodson later had some very nice runs himself, and I had him on my 53-man roster because I thought he showed enough to earn that spot, but maybe they can get him back.
I did for a long time until I just added more players in other positions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I think that actually is the most interesting position on the roster. But I do think that the second most interesting position on the roster is wide receiver, where the Packers kept 7 receivers. In the previous years, they had kept 6, 5, although Tyler Ervin was a running back that year, so he was kind of a hybrid, and 6 in years previously. So this is the most they've kept under LaFleur. They kept Alan Lazard, Sammy Watkins, Randall Cobb, Christian Watson, Romeo Doubs, Amari Rogers, and then this 7th spot, the most interesting one, Samori Toure over Juwan Winfrey, even after all of the things that Aaron Rodgers had to say about number 88 Winfrey.
Yeah, this one surprised me a little bit. I put Winfrey into my own 53 prediction, though I was I kind of favored Toure. He seemed more explosive and I think has more long-term upside, though Winfrey is a noticeably better blocker. And he's some nice blocks in that last game to open up one of Goodson's run after catches.
Yeah, I think Winfrey's a noticeably better blocker, but I do think Toure is a noticeably better special teamer.
Yeah, I also liked Toure's. He seemed to have a knack for finding the openings in the middle of the defense.
He had a really nice preseason. Not even just quietly. He was very good against the Chiefs.
Oh yeah, thought he got better and better as the preseason went on.
Yeah,
routes, cutting deep crossers over the middle and catching the ball. And finding the open spots in the defense.
To me, I had Winfrey on my 53-man roster, but solely because of Aaron Rodgers vouching for him. Although I do think that is something we should talk about, because I know, and we all Packers fans know, that one of the things that upset Rodgers in the past was not having his input feel valued. And so is this something like the Kumaro situation where he vouched for a guy and they decided not to keep him and Rodgers is going to be upset about it? Or is this something where they ran it past him? They were like, hey, we really like Toure. We drafted him in the 7th round for a reason. We really liked the depth in this draft. And we think that he has a lot more long-term upside than Winfrey. It's got to be one or the other. You hope it's the second one because you hope
I hope it's the second one too. I think we'll know. It might take a little while. Might not know right away which of those it is. But yeah, I like Toure. I think Toure has the upside. Personally, I think he has upside to be
and
like
he's a good gunner. He's a really good gunner. He's going to be nice on special teams.
That was nice. The other thing I think about, when you talk about just the not necessarily Toure over versus Winfrey, but just the 7 receivers, there are 2 different things they could be thinking here. One is the future, when Lazard, Watkins, and Cobb are all essentially on 1-year deals right now. So receivers for the future, or protection against injury with their top 3 receivers all missing a couple of games per year.
Yeah, and it is interesting that this is the most receivers they've kept under LaFleur. So I think the Packers seem to agree that this is some of the best receiver depth they've had, and also to agree, because I think there's almost no chance Watkins and Cobb get through all 17 games. And Lazard, like you've said earlier, has had some struggle staying healthy. And then Christian Watson hasn't even gone on the field yet. So there's no guarantee that he's going to be out there.
Yeah, and I don't know whether he missed games in college or not. That's something I haven't looked up. Sorry.
Yeah. Well, anyway, I think
that's the wide. Ross Uglum would know.
Yes, he would. I think that's the wide receiver spot covered. Let's move on to the tight end spot. Another position that I think we don't need to go into much. They kept 4. They've kept 4 under LaFleur every year he's been here. Robert Tonyan, Mercedes Lewis, Josiah DeGuara, and Tyler Davis. I think as soon as Dominique Daphne was cut, I think everyone could tell that these were the 4 they were going to keep.
This was the 4. There was no real chance of it being any different with the players on the roster.
I think the only thing that has changed in this tight end room during the offseason has maybe been the order. I think maybe DeGuara and Tyler Davis have switched spots, although they play such different positions that it's kind of tough to tell.
Right. What's interesting is that DeGuara is essentially the only player they have at his actual position.
Yeah, he's the only real fullback they have. Yeah. Or like fullback-esque player. H-back, yeah.
Kind of player that they have on the roster right now.
Yeah, and I could see them putting Tyler Davis back there a little bit, but I don't think
they need to, they will do that.
Yeah, I could see that as well. But anyway, I think we can move on from the tight end position just because that feels pretty standard. On to one of the other more interesting positions, the O-line room, where the Packers have kept 10 this year after previously under LaFleur keeping 9 every single year. So it does seem like they agreed that there was some really nice depth here at that O-line room, and they decided to keep the most they'd ever kept. They kept David Bakhtiari, John Runyon, Josh Myers, Royce Newman, Elton Jenkins, Yosh Nijman, Zach Tom, Jake Hansen, Sean Ryan, and Rasheed Walker over Caleb Jones, despite him only playing in one preseason game, which I think is the most interesting thing about this position group.
Yeah, this is where I diverged from I was wrong on the final 53. I had in the end put Caleb Jones in instead of Walker because
I was wrong too. I had them both. I thought they were going to keep 11.
That knowing that it mostly kept 9, I was not expecting 11. But I had Jones instead of Walker because I thought Jones had shown more over more games, and because of that, not necessarily because the Packers would like him long term. It's more of this notion of who's going to get through to the practice squad, because I think they're going to try to get Jones to the practice squad.
Well,
but,
I don't think Rasheed Walker. I don't think Rasheed Walker would have made it to the practice squad. He was too good. He was too good of a prospect, and he was a draft pick.
Yeah,
I think
he just
Jones showed a lot.
Show
That's true, but I think Jones showed a lot. But I think he also showed that he's very raw. Whereas I think Walker was a draft pick. He was widely considered to be more of a 5th, 4th round prospect, but fell because of injuries. Which you could argue that, well, if he fell because of injuries, maybe no team's going to want to claim him. But I would have kept both because I also do think that Jones is going to get snagged and he's going to be one of the people we miss.
So did you ever think about keeping both and dropping somebody else?
I just think that with Bakhtiari and Elton's injury concerns, you can't afford to cut decently competent O-line. And the only non-decently competent O-line, no shade at all, the only one that I don't think is ready to play NFL snaps right now is Sean Ryan, and they're not cutting a 3rd rounder.
No, they won't cut him. They won't. One thing that's interesting, I was thinking that if they went as low as 9 like they did other years, I think that would have tipped their hand that at least one of Bakhtiari and Jenkins would be ready. Because they wouldn't. I don't think they'd go game day with only 9, and basically only 7 playable offensive linemen.
That's impossible.
Yeah, with only
that's
two,
why.
with
That's
only
part
two
of the
subs.
reason I thought they would keep 11 is because of the uncertainty in Elton and Bakhtiari, and honestly, some of the uncertainty with Myers. He only played 5? He only played a handful of games last year.
But he's playing with knee braces this year after last year's experience.
But it wasn't just the knee though; it was the finger
It was
too.
this weird finger issue, which that's
true. That's kind of just
that's
got to
be kind of a fluke.
That's
right?
kind of fluky. Yeah, it was like a broken finger into an infection. So it's it's kind of fluky. But yeah, that's kind of how I felt about the O-line room. I would have liked to see Caleb Jones stay on the roster. I would love to see him back on the practice squad.
Yep.
We'll
know by tomorrow afternoon.
Yeah, I would not be surprised at all if he gets snagged by someone else. Competent O-line are hard to find in the NFL, and I think he showed that he could play in a pinch for an NFL team right now.
But speaking of players playing a pinch and competent O-line, Dennis Kelly got cut today.
By who?
The Colts.
Oh. I mean, if Bakhtiari and Elton can't go, I would love for them to maybe give him a look, bring him in for a workout.
Yeah, so that kind of surprised me when I saw that.
Yeah, I mean,
so
I thought he looked okay last year.
Yeah.
I thought he looked all right. I mean, I know the playoff game didn't go great for him, but I wouldn't mind having him back for depth. Not at all. Well, anyway, so that makes up the offense. That's 25 players on offense, and now let's move on to the defense, where we also have 25 players. Starting with the D-line, where a lot of it is as you'd expect, although that 6th spot is a bit interesting. In the past 3 years, under LaFleur, they have kept 6, 6, and 5. They keep 6 again this year. They kept Kenny Clark, Dean Lowry, Jerron Reed, TJ Slayton, Devontae Wyatt, and then in that 6th spot, it seemed to be a bit of a 3-man race between Jack Heflin, Chris Slayton, and Jonathan Ford. And I thought Heflin was going to be in the lead, but they went with Jonathan Ford, the draft pick, the 7th rounder out of Miami. I know you had Heflin in your 53-man prediction.
Well, actually, I had Heflin in like my 3 of my last 4.
Oh, you switched it at the last second.
The last second,
sneaky,
I took him
sneaky.
out and I went with 5 defensive tackles.
Oh, okay. So
Five-
you
so-
still didn't have Ford.
I still didn't have Ford. I
Okay.
had 6 corners,
Okay. Yep.
5 safeties, and only 5 D linemen
Okay.
in the end. So that's what I decided in the end there.
I actually thought that Ford looked pretty good in the preseason. I don't think he looked as good as Heflin, but maybe they think there's a little more ceiling there. He's a bit bigger than Heflin, I think.
He's a big dude.
He's a big dude. I think he'll play a little more on special teams probably than Well, they both would have played a lot on special teams.
Coming out of college, in the draft after it, he's not a player I actually looked at before the draft. I think he worked in the protection units for punts and kicks and field goals, extra points. So that was, I think, his special teams experience, and the speculation was that's why he was drafted, because he was not a good tester. He was actually the lowest RAS score of any of their players by a lot.
But I feel like he looks quicker than he tested.
But it may be that he's not quite as heavy as he was then.
Yeah, that's definitely true. That's the truth. That's true for Caleb Jones as well.
Yeah,
but that's the big surprise there on that D-line group. I think the rest of it is very
I thought
expected.
Heflin was looking good.
Yeah, I also had 5 guys on my 53-man roster, but Gutekunst loves his draft picks, and he kept every single one of them.
Right, as the training camp and the preseason went on, I think I heard more and more people saying, well, maybe they won't keep any of their 7th round picks, and they ended up keeping all of them.
Yeah, I think I would have thought they'd keep 2. I think that keeping none of them would have been I think it would have gone against a lot of what Gutekunst said, where he talked about specifically how he felt like the 7th round of this draft had a lot of 5th rounders in it because of the COVID displacements.
Right, where people waited
had to wait. Yeah,
to
exactly.
Declare than they.
And so
earlier other years.
I would have been surprised if he had talked about after the draft how high he was on the 7th rounders and then kept none of them. That would have been kind of surprising to me. But anyway, that's the D-line group. We're going to move on now to the edge group, where it's some more of kind of what you'd expect. They kept 5. They've kept 4, 5, and 5 in the last 3 years. They kept Rashawn Gary, Preston Smith, Tipa Naliai, Jonathan Garvin, and J.J. Enagbare. There was some talk there about whether or not Kobe Jones, who had gotten some snaps with the ones when Gary had to go out for one practice, might make the roster. There have been talks about Ladarius Hamilton possibly making the roster, but in the end, they go with the 3 expected ones: Gary, Preston Smith, and the draft pick Enagbare, and then Tipa and Jonathan Garvin.
Yeah, actually, this is a position I had the 5 correct. Had the whole position correct.
Gold star.
It changed a little bit from the beginning of the offseason or earlier in the offseason program. Hamilton was like one of the first guys off the bench behind Smith and Gary. And then he ended up further down the depth chart.
Yeah. And I think if I'm looking at this from a depth chart perspective, I think it's going to go, in my opinion, Gary, Smith, Garvin, and Enagbare, Tipa? Is that kind of how you see it?
That's the way I would say, unless Enagbare moves up.
Yeah, with room for Enagbare to move up a little bit.
Consistent in setting the edge against the run.
Oh yeah, his ceiling is definitely the best of the 3 of those guys.
Yeah, I think he's got more pass rush moves and more effective.
Yeah, but I do think the edge went kind of as expected. I'm a little disappointed that Kobe Jones didn't make it. I thought that he showed a lot, and I would love to see him back on the practice squad. But let's move on to
prime practice squad candidate.
Oh yeah, but it is tough, edges who show stuff in preseason. I know you said that we only one person usually gets claimed per team, but it's
watch me the Packers we got to catch
4
up on
guys.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, they've only had 3 in the last 6 years, so we got to.
Wouldn't that be something? Just oh yeah, so Packers lost all of their depth because they cut some good players, and freaking it's going to be like the Bears. It's 100% going to be the Bears and the Broncos. The Bears and the Broncos. The Bears and the Broncos, who have former Packers coaches, are going to take half the Packers roster. I wouldn't even be that surprised. But anyway,
Well,
let's
the
move on.
Bears, they could just throw half of their roster away and nobody would be able to tell the difference.
That's what Robert Mays from the Athletic Football Show, which is an excellent podcast, I would recommend it. He was talking about, he's like, man, the thing is, when your team is not expected to do much, you can just churn the bottom of that roster and just keep picking guys up on the wire over and over again. So they're going to be sniping people for a lot of these guys. I mean, yeah, of course, why not? But anyway, let's move on to the linebacker position, another position that went exactly as expected. They've kept 4, 4, and 5 in the last 3 years. They keep 4 again this year. Devondre Campbell, Quay Walker, Isaiah McDuffie, Chris Barnes as the 4. I think the only question going into camp was whether or not who that 4th spot would be, whether or not McDuffie would make the team. But then I think as camp went on and the preseason games happened, McDuffie just flashed so much that these 4 were complete rock solid locks. And the only question was whether or not they might keep a 5th in Ray Wilborn or Ty Summers, but they stuck with 4.
Yeah, and 4 has been, well, it's not that many years, but now it's 3 years out of 4 with the 4 inside linebackers.
Yeah,
and they seemed well ahead of anybody else.
Yeah, there was a noticeable gap after Barnes.
Yeah.
For the play. And
you have McDuffie ahead of Barnes.
Of course. McDuffie played before Barnes. Although I do think the depth chart is more position oriented in this linebacker group. I do think it's Devondre Campbell, then Chris Barnes at that Mike spot, and then Quay Walker, and then Isaiah McDuffie at that Will spot, that weak side linebacker. And so that's why I think McDuffie was playing. Sorry, reverse that actually. Although, because McDuffie was playing with Quay Walker, so I actually take that back. I take that back entirely I do think McDuffie has passed Chris Barnes, although I do think Chris Barnes is underrated. Sorry about that. That was a mistake. McDuffie did play with Quay, so that's my mistake. So yeah, I do have McDuffie ahead of Chris Barnes. He played ahead of him in all of the preseason games. I think Chris Barnes is underrated, but you just got to go off what the Packers decision making process tells us.
Yeah, I think McDuffie is a player who had the biggest year 2 leap to my eyes.
Yeah, I mean,
in the games, seeing in the games anyway.
I mean, in terms of who else is even on that list, is it just Jake Hansen and him? Are they the 2?
Oh, except
that have had the biggest
3, right?
Oh, you're right.
But TJ Slayton, I suppose, is
that's fair. That's fair. That's a good cut. That's good. Yeah, that's right. Jake Hansen was on the practice squad the whole first year. But yeah, that's the linebacker group. Pretty standard. Let's move on to the corner group, where they kept. This was a bit surprising. They only kept 5 after keeping 7, 6, and 6 the last 3 years. And although we'll get to the safety group, they did keep 10. They did keep 5 safeties, so they did keep 10 total secondary members, which is the same number of secondary players they kept last year. But only 5 corners: Jair Alexander, Eric Stokes, Rasul Douglas, Keyshawn Nixon, and Shamar John Charles, which I think we all had as the 5 top-ranked corners. But I do think that a lot of people thought that a 6th one would be there for some special teams and thought that maybe Rico Gafford or Kabianento or Innis Gaines, who was cut with an injury designation, if I remember correctly, would take a 6th spot and kind of be a special teamer / depth piece there.
Yeah, I even had Keandre Thomas in my final 53.
Yeah, but I think they were listing him under safety, weren't they? Or am I misremembering?
I thought he was under corner.
Ah, well. But anyway, only 5 corners.
Only 5 corners of that. Shamar John Charles really kind of jumped ahead of that group fighting for number 5.
Yeah, I mean, here's my question for you. Who's 4th on the depth chart, Nixon or John Charles?
I don't think we know yet.
I don't think so either. I would lean Nixon. I would lean Nixon for now, since they did do that thing where they brought Nixon in and put Douglas to safety. But I think it's close. I think John Charles showed a lot in his second year. Actually, he's another one.
Yeah,
big leap in year 2.
Think of before had a big year 2 leap.
Yep, 100%. But yeah, only 5 corners, and I do think this is a very top-heavy corner group. But I actually was very impressed
going into the offseason.
But I was impressed. I was pleasantly surprised by Nixon and John Charles. I was very pleasantly impressed.
I think a lot of people were talking about how rough the Packers' secondary depth looked, but that was mostly getting down, especially for the corners, to like the 6th, 7th, and 8th or 9th corners who were not going to be on the team. Mm-hmm. And so I think Nixon was very highly rated in the slot last year, actually, though not so well on the boundary.
Yeah, I mean,
but
it's a different position. It's almost an entirely different position.
Yeah, but when people said he's coming in just for special teams, he's a pretty good slot corner too.
And I think that, like we said in our previous podcast, in the second one, that the fact that they were willing to bring Keyshawn Nixon in with the starters and move Rasul Douglas back shows that they like Nixon as one of their 7 best secondary
defensive
players.
Backs.
Yeah, defensive backs. But anyway, that's our corner room. On to the safeties, where a little bit of surprise in a couple spots, but they kept 5 after keeping 4, 5, and 4 the last 3 years under LaFleur. They kept Adrian Amos, Darnell Savage, Dallin Levitt, Tariq Carpenter, and Micah Abernathy. And I think the 2 things I want to talk about here are the fact that Dallin Levitt is back practicing and is on the 50th. Yeah, super shocking, because it sounded like when LaFleur said it's going to be a while on the shoulder, that's usually LaFleur code for he's going on IR and he might be back by the end of the season.
That's like you can't tell the difference between what he said about Levitt from what he said about Jair last year. Oh,
exactly.
Yeah, he might be out for a little while with that shoulder issue.
You can't tell the difference between what he said between Dallin Levitt and Vernon Scott, who got cut with an injury designation this year. Like that man gives 0 about injuries. You cannot tell. He is keeping you guessing at every turn.
Yep.
But I think that's the big thing for Levitt, though. It sounds like he's going to be good to go. I know a lot of people did speculate, though, that they might keep him on the 53 and then add him to IR after and add someone back. But the fact that he's already back at practice does seem like to me that that's not going to happen.
Yeah, I had been planning that for weeks until he started practicing again the other day.
Yeah. But that's going to be really nice to have. I wasn't that impressed with him at safety, to be honest, but to have another experienced special teamer who knows what Bisaccia wants. It's not like the special teams has looked very great so far, but it'll be helpful to have more guys back there that know what.
I think his
hopefully know what they're doing.
Special teams looks much better than his coverage ability. I really like Micah Abernathy. I thought he looked really good, making lots of nice plays, diagnosing and attacking.
You know what my problem with Micah Abernathy is? Why on earth is he wearing 46? Why is he? I hate to be part of jersey number Twitter, jersey number podcasting, but 46 is a terrible safety number.
He must have been better than they expected.
Yes, because that is the number of a guy who is going to get cut. That is exactly the number of a guy who is just out there. Like, who is number 46? But it is interesting, though, just a little touch on Micah Abernathy is that Wes Hodkiewicz had a little bit of a deep dive where he looked back at different Packers 53-man rosters, and he found that Micah Abernathy, in terms of players without an accrued NFL season, so like rookies, players who didn't play a full season in the NFL, so non-vets, he made the team in the least number of days from when he joined the team to cut down day that the Packers have ever had. He only had 20 days to earn a spot on the Packers roster from when he was added to now, and he was able to earn that spot on the 53, which I think just says loads about him. He's a former USFL player. He had a hard time getting to the league, but he has earned his spot on this team. He looked good in that preseason game.
He's talking about. One thing I'd like to say before we leave this position is I feel really bad for Sean Davis.
Yeah.
Here's a guy who was the number 3 safety for a lot of the offseason program, was looking good, and he gets hurt like 2 days before cutdowns.
Yeah, so that's hurt on Monday, which I didn't even see that report when I was looking over the tweets on Monday's practice. I totally missed it. Yeah, and then cut with a knee injury is so tough.
Make it back to the practice squad. I don't know what the knee injury is.
I saw him put something out on his Instagram story. Someone tweeted it. I can't remember who tweeted the screenshot of it, but he said, feeling close to 100, going to be back soon. Like, don't worry. Something like that. So maybe they're going to add him back to the practice squad.
I think he's a player that they would want to, based on how much
run he got with
the
ones and the twos. Yeah. I would love him back. They need as much freaking help back there as they can get.
Yeah, and Carpenter looks like mostly a linebacker or special team player.
Yeah,
His
he only
coverage
played.
left a little. His coverage
It's not great.
Communication.
It's not great, Bob. It's not
left a
great.
Left a little bit to be desired, though. He had nice tackling.
Yes,
both on
I mean,
special
I
teams
saw
and
him.
on defense.
Yeah, I saw him make that tackle on special teams, and I immediately was like, I'm in. I would rather our fifth safety be a pure special teamer and they add people around him. And I just need at least the 20th ranked special teams. And if that means keeping a fifth safety who can't cover but can play special teams, then so be it. That's the L you have to take, I think. At this point, they just have to try something new. Like, they need guys who can tackle. They need guys who can fill a lane and beat a block.
Who
stay in their lanes. What was it? It's just been so bad for so long that if they have a good special teamer, they can't afford to cut him. And they clearly drafted Carpenter because they thought he could be a good special teamer.
He's got some good traits for special teams. He's big enough to hold up, and he's got enough speed, mostly straight line speed, and it looks like he's a good tackler. It's like, form tackle, wrapping people up, bring them to the ground a lot of the time.
Exactly. And they just need bodies on special teams, which I think is what Levitt, Abernathy, Carpenter are going to be. And hopefully they can sneak Davis back onto the practice squad. Although how does that work with the injury designation? Is that even possible?
So as I understand it, waived with injury designation, you clear waivers, you revert back to the team that waived you on the injured list. Then they get an injury settlement, and then they're free to go anywhere.
But if they get an injury settlement, they can't come back. I think there is a gap of time.
There's a little gap. I think
it's more sizable than a little.
IR.
No, it's not. But I think if I remember correctly, and sorry, listeners, that we're not as on top of this as we should be. But I believe that there is a gap of time. I think I read something that Ken Ingalls on Twitter. Follow him. He's a great follow. He is. Let me give you his Twitter real quick. He is great for following for Packers cap information. He keeps a great running total of that. It's at Ken Ingalls, KENINGALLS, Ken Ingalls Packers cap. But he tweeted that there is a gap of time that you need to wait before you can re-sign these players when you reach an injury designation. But that is the defense, 25, so an even 25-25, perfectly balanced, as all things should be. But yeah, and then I think that the most interesting and most impactful roster decision of the Packers 53-man roster, though, was on special teams, where they kept who you'd expect at punter, Pat O'Donnell. They kept who you expect at long snapper, Jack Coco. But Mason Crosby, the Silver Fox himself, is off the PUP list. He is most likely going to be back for week 1. They cut Ramiz Ahmed, and so that seems like an all systems go for Mason Crosby, doesn't it?
Yeah, they did take it down to the wire.
Oh, they took it as down to the wire as you're legally allowed to do.
Yep, and say, okay, we're not going to let anybody know what we're planning ahead of time.
You got to keep them guessing. You got to keep them guessing. But yeah. I think it's so. I know he struggled a lot last year, but we've seen Mason Crosby bounce back from struggles before. I know he's coming off injury, but yeah, I trust him out there more than a lot of people.
Yeah, and I think they like Ahmed. He was looking good.
I would like him back on the practice squad. And I almost thought they might keep him outright over Crosby entirely, given Crosby's age and injuries. I thought they would be this guy Ramiz Ahmed, pretty good.
Thought that
pretty
was
not
on
bad.
The table.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah.
And otherwise for the special teams, I thought Coco has been looking pretty solid. In the preseason games anyway. I mean, he hasn't actually had a bad snap on a punt or a kick. Yeah.
He's been better than Bradley was
or Wordle.
And he's been better than Wordle was. So I mean, all we ask for is competency.
In off season were a little erratic, that his snapping was, but at least as far as the preseason games have gone, he's looked good.
Yeah, but I think that Mason Crosby news is the most important news of the night or of the day.
That's big news.
Yeah,
and more and more of our players are coming off PUP.
I think it's just so hard to win close games if you don't have a veteran kicker who can kick in the cold. That's the other thing with Rami Ahmed. You don't know if he can kick in the cold.
No, we have no idea if he can.
And to be fair, maybe he can, but it's just we don't have any like tangible evidence. I mean,
I forget where he
like
went
college. Tell me why I was asking my producer that same thing.
I think he only kicked.
He played college football in Nevada, so gets a little cold there.
Only like his last year or two, right? Didn't he not played all his first 2 years in college?
I trust you on that one. That's a poll you would know. But yeah, that's the Packers 53-man roster. 25 on offense, 25 on defense, 3 on special teams. Mason Crosby is back. But then there were a lot of cuts around the NFL.
Yeah,
so we also each have
quick dive into that.
Yeah, we can do a little quick dive. I was just going to talk about the 5 players that I would be interested in the Packers adding. If you want, I can give my 5, you can give your 5, and we can just I can give my 5 and talk about why I like him, and you can give your 5 and talk about why you like him.
Sure.
Okay, so my 5 were Anthony Harris, who was just cut by the Eagles. I think that we've seen him a long time for the Vikings. If he's willing to take a little bit of a pay cut to play against his former team that let him go, I think he's still a very solid safety in this league. Tony Jefferson from the Ravens. He's probably going back to the Ravens. He's kind of a Ravens lifer. Shout out my friend Garrett, who tweeted that he at Garrett Sprints on Twitter that he expects Tony Jefferson back on the roster in 48 hours. I would be interested in Logan Ryan, who the Buccaneers just cut. Just those 3 guys are all safeties, and I think we can use some like real experienced safeties. And then I would be interested in either of Dalton Keene or Devin Asiasi, who the Patriots just cut both of them. I know Dalton Keene has really struggled with injuries, but they're both tight ends that the Patriots took in the 3rd round just a few years ago. Dalton Keene has like barely been able to even touch a football field. He's been so injured, but maybe just come and bring him in for a physical. I think they both have a lot of talent. I liked Keene coming out of Virginia Tech. I liked Asiasi coming out of UCLA. They could always use more tight ends in this offense.
Yeah, I remember looking at those guys. They're kind of the same draft as DeGuara.
Yep, exactly. And who are your 5, Dad?
So I kind of have some similar positions. I was also thinking tight end. I tagged OJ Howard as somebody I would think is worth checking out anyway.
Yeah. I know he's still recovering from that Achilles,
but left in the tank after his injury. But I think they should at least check him out.
Yeah, there was a report he's going to head back to the Bills, but if you make a waiver claim, come on down.
Yeah,
it's cold here too.
And then for safety, a player I was thinking would be interesting was Jaquiski Tart.
Yeah,
Somebody had been thinking of for them to sign before he signed with the Eagles.
With the Eagles, yep.
Surprised me that they cut him because in addition to being, he's also pretty good in the slot as well as being able to play safety. So he has.
I would like him as well,
versatility.
But I do think shout out at G_Fergie, my friend Gavin on Twitter, who is a big Niners fan. He tweeted that I think I saw him tweet, or maybe I just imagined it, but I think Tart's probably going back to the Niners, given that Jimmy Ward is really injured, and that's where Jaquiski Tart had played the last however many years. They have a need there. He knows the people there. I think he'll probably head back there. But if the Packers could convince him to come, I think he could really help out their secondary.
Yeah, I think he'd be nice. But yeah, if he may choose to go to the Niners if he can.
Yeah.
Other players looked at, the only receiver that kind of have had any interest in is like Tyler Johnson, and that was mostly because I thought he was kind of interesting coming out of Minnesota.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So he might be worth taking a look at. I'm not sure if he is an improvement over what we have. I actually kind of like our group of guys and the potential they have.
Yeah, I agree. I don't know if he's better than Toure even.
Right. And then the last position is edge rusher.
Yep.
And 2 players who were cut, one today and one yesterday, Devin Kennard and Kamoko Toure.
Yep. Yeah, Toure had 5 sacks?
5.5 sacks last year for the Colts.
Yeah,
he got let go by the Niners, and so thinking about want to improve. And a lot of people have talked about this idea of getting a veteran edge rusher added to the group, and so I think one of these guys might be an interesting way to go.
Yeah, I mean, I would you can never have too many good pass rushers. That's just a rule.
But one thing we do know, Packers are not claiming 10 guys.
No, they are not.
And to claim these players off of waivers, they have to go to your 53. You cannot claim a player and put on your practice squad.
Yep, they can't go right there. Well, that's the Packers 53. We're through the whole thing. Do you have anything?
NFL Cut Down Day episode.
Yep. You've heard our raw reactions.
Some surprises.
Do you have any? A few, yeah. But I think for the most part, kind of expected.
Yeah. For the most part, kind of expected.
Yeah. No crazy cuts like there had been in previous years. No Mike Daniels cut. No Josh Sitton cut. Nothing like that this year. Pretty standard, I would say.
Yeah, I think that was saved for the Raiders.
We could talk about that for another hour, but anyway, that's the Packers 53. Thank you so much for coming and listening to this podcast. You can find it on YouTube, Father Son Packers Podcast. Find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever your podcasts are found. You can find us. Please follow us on Twitter at Father Son Packer. We're trying to get our engagement up. Subscribe to us on YouTube. Follow us wherever you can. But in the meantime, go Pack Go.
Go Pack Go.